It happened at my father's 70th birthday dinner. In a country club banquet room, lined with white linen and hollow laughter. The wine had been flowing for hours when my Uncle Rick stood to make a toast-red-faced, slightly swaying. The kind of man who thought wit lived at the bottom of a whiskey glass. To Frank Grant, he bellowed, raising his drink. A hell of a father, husband and, well, maybe not everyone's father. Right, Jason? The room paused. Someone let out a nervous chuckle. My mother laughed a little too loudly. My cousin Emma looked down at her plate. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. But something inside me went very still. It wasn't the kind of joke that comes out of nowhere. It had weight behind it, like it had been sitting in someone's throat, waiting for an excuse to be spoken aloud. My father didn't react. Just kept cutting into his steak, like the moment hadn't happened. My mother smiled at the table but didn't look at me. I lifted my glass and drank. Not because I was thirsty, but because I needed something to do with my hands. The rest of the dinner blurred by. Toasts, cake, family stories I'd heard 100 times. But the air felt different now, like I was no longer part of the shared nostalgia, just a guest among bloodlines. My parents barely spoke to me that night. They made small talk with my brother about his new condo, asked Emma about law school, passed the potatoes without looking in my direction. When we got home, I asked my mother about it, just casually, like I was brushing off a dumb comment. Rick's joke, I said. Weird, right? She didn't miss a beat. Oh, you know Rick, she said, brushing invisible crumbs off the counter. Too much wine, and too little sense. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I nodded. Let it go. At least, that's what I told myself. But something about the way no one had corrected him, the way they all acted like it wasn't strange, like it wasn't the first time they'd heard it, that stuck with me. That night, lying in bed next to silence, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I'd felt like I really belonged in that family. I couldn't. It didn't start with that joke. The truth is, things had been slipping away for years, but quietly. Like a chair being pulled out from under you, an inch at a time. I just didn't realize how far I'd fallen until I hit the floor. A few years ago, I noticed I wasn't included in the conversation when my parents rewrote their wills. Just standard updates. My father had said when I brought it up. Nothing for you to worry about. Except my brother had mentioned the meeting. And Emma. And even Uncle Rick, who apparently now held some kind of trustee advisor role. I never got a copy of the revisions. Never saw a single document. Then there was the lake trip. Every summer, our family rented a cabin up near Lake Champlain. It was tradition canoes, bonfires, board games, and too much sunscreen. One June, I found out through Facebook photos that they'd all gone without me. No one said a word. When I asked my mother about it, she said, "Oh, honey, we just assumed you were busy with work. You're always so busy." After that, I started noticing the exclusions everywhere. The family email thread grew quiet. Group texts skipped my name. I'd show up for holidays and find out decisions had already been made of vacation plans, estate updates, medical directives from my dad. All discussed, all finalized, without me. At first, I chalked it up to age, to being single, to living one town over instead of 2 blocks away. But the excuses started to fray. I was the only one not given a key when my parents downsized to their new place. I was the only one who didn't get a seat at the table when my father's company was sold and the stock was distributed. My brother got equity. I got a copy of the press release. I asked questions, got soft smiles and vague answers. "You know we love you, Jason. This has nothing to do with anything. Don't make this a big deal." But it was a big deal. Because I was being erased in slow motion, and the people doing it had my last name. It wasn't just about money. It was about being pushed out of my own life story. I didn't know why they were doing it, but I knew I had to find out. Before they finished writing me out completely. It was nearly midnight when I found Emma out back, standing alone by the pool with a half-empty glass of wine and the kind of expression that only shows up when someone's about to say something they shouldn't. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "You got a minute?" I followed her down the stone steps into the side garden far enough from the house that the laughter and clinking glasses became background noise. She looked over her shoulder once, then turned to me. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began, voice low. "But that joke earlier? From Uncle Rick? It wasn't just a joke." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "A few months ago, I was at your parents' house, just dropping off some forms for the estate lawyer. I heard your mom talking to Aunt Jean in the kitchen. She said," Emma exhaled slowly, like saying it made it more real. "She said you weren't their biological child, that they adopted you, and that you didn't really have a claim to the estate." I didn't speak. Couldn't. The words didn't register as real at first. Not until she added, "She said it kind of cold, like she'd said it before, like it was just a matter of fact." I looked down at my hands, suddenly unsure what they were supposed to do. "Why are you telling me now?" Emma's eyes welled with guilt. "Because you looked shocked tonight. And I thought maybe they'd told you already. Or that it wasn't true. But if you didn't know Jason, I'm sorry." I didn't respond, just nodded once and turned to leave. I didn't blame her. Not really. But something about hearing those words spoken aloud, "You weren't really their child," lit a fuse I didn't know was there. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. No text, no warning. I just showed up. My mother answered the door in a silk robe and a look that said, "Unannounced visits are for people without boundaries." I walked past her into the foyer. "Jason?" she said, closing the door. "What's going on?" I turned to her. "Emma told me what you said, that I'm adopted." Her face didn't register surprise, just stillness, then a sigh. "I was wondering when you'd hear." "So it's true?" I asked. She didn't answer at first. Walked into the kitchen. I followed. "I don't see how this changes anything," she said, voice clipped. "We raised you, loved you, gave you everything." "That's not what I asked." She set down her mug. "Yes, you were adopted. You were just a few days old. We didn't think it mattered." "You didn't think it mattered?" My voice rose slightly, not with anger, but disbelief. "You were always part of the family," she said. "Blood doesn't change that." "Then why lie?" She looked away. "It was easier." "For who?" I asked. She didn't respond, just walked down the hall and into her bedroom. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the framed photos lining the hallway. Smiling holidays, vacations, birthday parties, all of them now reframed in silence. She hadn't denied it, but she hadn't told me the truth either. I was supposed to live my life, not knowing the foundation was a lie, because apparently, it was easier. But what struck me hardest wasn't the betrayal. It was the cold efficiency of it. How quickly she'd moved past the conversation. Like this wasn't a family unraveling, but just another detail to be filed away and forgotten. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just walked back to my car and drove home. But inside, something had changed. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I was certain. They were hiding something. And now, I was going to find it. The first thing I did when I got home was pull out the fireproof lockbox where I kept all my important documents, passports, insurance, tax records. The copy of my birth certificate that had always been there was gone. I checked twice, emptied the box, dug through drawers, folders, old envelopes. Nothing. Next, I called the county records office. The woman on the line told me, politely but firmly, that my request would take several weeks unless I had parental verification or an authorized legal interest in the record. "I am the record," I said. "I understand, sir. But unless you were listed as a parent or guardian, we require additional verification." When I asked if there were any changes made to the document in recent years' redactions, amendments, she hesitated. "I can't disclose that over the phone," she said. That night, I pulled out the old family albums, the thick leather-bound ones from the attic, full of photos printed before iPhones made memories disposable. There were pictures of my brother as a baby. His first steps, first bath, first Christmas. But my pages started later. No newborn photos. No baby footprints. My first appearance was as a toddler at a zoo, standing next to a goat I couldn't have been older than 3. When I asked my mom years ago why there weren't any baby photos of me, she'd said, "You were such a squirmy baby. I couldn't get a good picture." I believed her. Now it felt like a script. I tried calling the family attorney, a man named Halverson who had been handling our estate paperwork since I was a teenager. His assistant said he was unavailable. I left a message. No response. I called again the next day. Still nothing. By the third call, his office voicemail had changed. Out of the office indefinitely due to personal matters. I emailed. No reply. The silence was no longer circumstantial. It was coordinated. I wasn't just being kept out. I was being erased. I ordered the DNA kit on a Wednesday. It arrived in a box small enough to fit inside a drawer, but heavy enough to carry the weight of my entire identity. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The swab was simple. 2 minutes. One cheek, then the other. I sealed the tube, registered the barcode, and dropped it off at the post office with hands I didn't realize were shaking. I told myself it wasn't about proving anything, that I just wanted answers. But that wasn't true. I needed truth. Something that couldn't be argued away, hidden behind silence or sealed doors. I needed data cold, clinical, and impossible to lie about. The waiting was the hardest part. 10 business days stretched like wire between my thoughts. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. Every glance at my email inbox sent my pulse ticking. What if they were right? What if I really wasn't theirs? And worse, what if I was, and they just didn't care? Each possibility was its own kind of loss. One meant I didn't belong. The other meant I never did. By the time the results finally came in, I didn't feel ready. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't care if you're ready. It arrives anyway. The results came in on a Thursday morning. I opened the email at the kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me, the cursor hovering over the words, "Your DNA results are ready." I clicked. The screen loaded slowly, or maybe it just felt that way because my hands had gone numb. When the page finally appeared, 2 names were listed at the top of my familial match summary, Frank Grant and Linda Grant. My parents. Confirmed. 99.98% match. Biological father. Biological mother. I stared at those words, waiting for the relief to come. It didn't. Not right away. Because underneath that confirmation, something else caught my eye. A genetic match listed as close family, half sibling. Name, Maria Jensen. I blinked. There was no Maria in our family. No cousin by that name. No relative I'd ever heard of. The match came with a predicted shared DNA percentage and an estimated relationship. Half-sister. She was 42, roughly 10 years older than me. The rest of the screen blurred. My heartbeat was in my ears. My parents hadn't adopted me. They'd lied about it on purpose, which meant the story wasn't about me not being theirs. It was about someone else they never told me existed. I stared at the screen again. Half-sister. Strong match. Public profile visible. A message button glowing in blue. I clicked it. "Hi Maria. I think we might need to talk," she replied within a day. Her message was careful, almost clinical. "Hi Jason. Yes. It looks like we're a DNA match. I was born in 1983 and adopted through a closed agency. I've never had contact with my biological parents. If you're open to talking, I'd like to know more." I gave her my number. We talked that night. Her voice was calm, older sister warm but cautious. She'd grown up in Minnesota, raised by a couple who'd been on the adoption list for years. Her adoptive parents were kind, stable, boring in the best way. They told her she was adopted early on, but never had any details beyond what the agency allowed. No names, no medical history. Just a photocopied form with private adoption, closed record, stamped across the top. But Maria had always been curious. After her second child was born, she took a DNA test to fill in medical blanks and maybe find some roots. "I didn't expect anything," she said. "But then your name came up. Half-sibling match. And when I traced the tree backward, I found your parents, Frank and Linda Grant. I didn't say anything. I looked them up," she continued gently. "And when I saw your photo on your dad's business website, I knew. You looked just like him. Same eyes." She had proof, birth record excerpts, non-identifying information that aligned too well to be coincidence. Her birthday was in April 1983. My parents would have been 19. They'd had a daughter before me, and given her away. Then spent the next 35 years pretending she didn't exist, while lying to me about being adopted just to cut me out of their estate. I hung up the phone in silence. Maria had been kind. She wanted nothing from me, but I could barely think straight. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was a pattern, a secret, and I had just peeled back the first layer. A week after our first call, Maria sent me a padded envelope. Inside were scanned copies of her adoption. Records yellowed, grainy, but real. Non-identifying details lined up too precisely to be coincidence. The location, the year, the biological parents listed as unmarried teenagers, both high school graduates, both Caucasian. Her birth certificate carried the original Situr City, and a hospital I knew well. I was born there too. She'd also included something else, 2 letters. One from the agency that had placed her, and one handwritten. It was unsigned, and the ink had faded with time, but the tone was unmistakable. Frightened, desperate, teenage. A girl writing to the agency about how she couldn't keep the baby, how her parents were furious, how she wanted to make sure her daughter went to a stable family. Maria believed it was from my mother. There was also a photo, a grainy black and white, taken in a mirror. A girl, holding a bundled infant in her arms, hair pulled back, eyes tired but soft. The angle wasn't great, but I recognized the nose. It was my mother's. She had a daughter. Before me. Before the house, the family name, the image of perfection she'd curated like wallpaper. And then came the twist of the knife. Maria had tracked her adoption through a friend in legal aid. She learned that the records had been sealed not by the state, but by special request from the birth parent specifically to block future contact. They hadn't just given her up, they'd erased her. And now, decades later, they were trying to erase me too. I sat in my apartment for hours that night, staring at the photos and documents, trying to reconcile the two people I thought I knew mom and dad with what they'd done. They hadn't lied to protect me. They'd lied to protect themselves. From shame, from judgment, from accountability. And worse, they'd recycled the same lie again. Only this time, they used it not to hide a child but to cut one out. Me. The next morning, I pulled out the only estate paperwork I still had. An old version of the family trust documents Dad had emailed me years ago, for reference. I'd never read them closely. I did now. Buried in the legal jargon was a clause I hadn't noticed before, one line in a sea of boilerplate. No adopted children or issue thereof shall be considered heirs to the Grant family estate unless otherwise stated. It hit me like a fist to the chest. That one sentence. That's why they told me I was adopted. Not because it was true, because it gave them a way to write me out without legal consequence. No confrontation. No explanation. Just a loophole. And it worked almost. I went back through my emails, my notes, everything I had. Over the past 3 years, My access to financial updates had slowly been cut off. Statements stopped coming. Conversations became vague. My brother was suddenly handling more of the family affairs. I had been softened up, distanced, disarmed. Because they knew. They knew if they made me believe I wasn't their blood, I wouldn't fight back. I wouldn't dare question it. And legally, the clause would hold up, unless proven otherwise. It wasn't just cruel. It was strategic. I closed the file and stared at the screen. They thought they'd planned for everything. The trust, the clause, the silence. What they didn't plan for was the DNA test. They didn't plan for Maria. And they sure as hell didn't plan for me to start fighting back. I didn't storm into their house. I didn't make threats or post angry rants online. I did what they never expected. I got precise. I called a lawyer, not the family's, mine, a probate attorney named Rachel Linton, sharp as broken glass and twice as hard to step on. She didn't blink when I told her what had happened. "Do you have proof?" she asked. I handed her everything. The DNA test, the scanned adoption records, the photo of my mother, holding Maria in that mirror, a notarized letter from Maria's legal aid contact confirming the private sealing request. And most importantly, the clause in the trust. She flipped through the documents in silence, then looked up at me. They tried to pull the oldest trick in the book, weaponizing a lie to strip you of standing. Unfortunately for them, your blood. And this is enough to burn the whole thing down. From there, we moved fast. Rachel filed a petition to challenge the validity of the trust exclusion based on fraudulent misrepresentation. We sent formal letters to the estate executor uncle, of course, and issued a preservation order on all trust-related documents and communications. Quietly, we built leverage, not just for my share, but to expose the entire lie for what it was, a coordinated deception designed to strip me of legal and emotional legitimacy. They had counted on my silence. But I had proof. And soon, so would everyone else. The meeting wasn't a confrontation. It was a presentation. I rented a private room at the same country club where Dad celebrated his 70th, called it a family discussion, made it sound civil, safe. Everyone showed up. My parents, my brother, Emma, a few of the usual extended relatives. They didn't know Maria would be there. She arrived 5 minutes before we started, composed but visibly nervous. I gave her a reassuring nod. I set up a projector, plugged in a flash drive. Then I turned to the room. "Thanks for coming," I said. "There's something I need to show you." I started with the DNA results, showed the confirmation that I was biologically related to both of them, Frank and Linda Grant. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Then I brought up Maria's file, her adoption, her sealed records, the letter that matched my mother's handwriting confirmed by an analyst, the side-by-side photos, the agency seal. Every piece accounted for. Then came the estate clause, the part that excluded adopted children from inheritance. And finally, I showed them what Rachel had prepared, a short summary of our legal claim, with a line highlighted in red. Claimant is a biological child whose legal standing was fraudulently undermined through deliberate misrepresentation. Silence. I turned around. My mother's face had gone white. She opened her mouth, then closed it. My father, stoic, unreadable for most of my life, looked like someone had punched him in the gut. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Maria sat next to me, silent but unflinching. She didn't come for revenge, just truth. When no one spoke, I finally did. "You didn't adopt me. You made that up. To erase me. Legally. Emotionally. Financially. And I'm done pretending I don't know why." Still, no one answered. The lie had been too large, too fragile. It collapsed under its own weight. And now it was their turn to sit in the silence they'd created. Families don't break clean, they splinter. In the weeks after the meeting, the reactions came in waves. Some relatives called to apologize, to say they had no idea what was going on. Others avoided me completely, pretending like it never happened. A few, me brother included, stopped returning my calls altogether. I didn't chase any of them. Rachel filed the formal petition to void the trust clause. With the DNA results, the verified fraudulent claim of adoption, and documentation of intentional misrepresentation, it wasn't even a contest. The judge ruled in my favor within 2 weeks. My legal status as a full heir to the Grant estate was reinstated. My name restored in writing, where it had never stopped belonging in blood. The court didn't strip my parents of anything. But they didn't have to. The damage was done quiet, permanent. Their credibility? Gone. Their standing in the family? Shaken. Their control? Over. They didn't reach out. No apology. No statement. Just a silence, thick with shame and pride. I wasn't expecting remorse. I just hoped they'd finally sit with what they'd done. That was their burden to carry now, not mine. And for the first time in years, I felt something that had nothing to do with revenge. I felt free. Maria and I started small. Coffee once a week. Emails. Shared stories. She'd ask about my childhood, what it was like growing up with our parents. I'd ask about hers, about the couple who raised her, about her life now. We filled in blanks together. Compared timelines. Realized we had the same taste in music. The same sarcastic sense of humor. The same laugh. Some nights, we'd talk for hours. About the weight of being discarded. About what it meant to reclaim your place when someone tried to erase you from it. She understood that feeling better than anyone. She never judged my anger. Never told me to let it go. She just listened. And let it be. For most of my life, I believed family was a fixed thing. Bloodlines. Birth certificates. Sunday dinners and holiday cards. But Maria showed me something different. That sometimes, family isn't who raised you. It's who shows up when the truth finally comes out. She never asked for anything, not inheritance, not justice, not even acknowledgement. She just wanted to know who she came from, who she was. And in the process, she helped me figure that out for myself. Not as the forgotten son, or the falsely adopted, but as someone who finally knew who he was, and who still had someone to call sister. 6 months later, I moved into a house of my own. Not the kind of cold, modern place my parents would have picked. Nothing showy or strategic. Just a 2-story craftsman on a quiet street, with a wraparound porch, creaky floorboards, and a backyard big enough for weekend barbecues and Saturday morning stillness. The walls were still mostly bare, except for one frame in the hallway, simple wood. No title. No plaque. Inside was a printed copy of my DNA report. The section that confirmed my parents. The line that revealed Maria. I didn't hang it for revenge. I hung it as a reminder that truth matters. That identity isn't just what we're told, but what we uncover for ourselves. Maria came over one Sunday afternoon with her 2 kids in tow. They ran through the living room like it belonged to them. I didn't mind. In a way, it did. We made coffee, sat on the porch while the kids played in the yard. The conversation flowed easily, now no tiptoeing, no caution. Just 2 people who had walked through fire and come out whole on the other side. She pointed to the framed DNA report as she passed it in the hallway. "You really put it up?" I shrugged. "It's not just about me." She smiled. Understanding. It never was. We talked until the sun dipped below the trees and shadows stretched across the grass. When they left, her youngest hugged me without being asked. That meant something. After they were gone, I sat in the living room with the windows open, letting the breeze carry through the silence. And I thought about what my parents tried to do. How they lied not to protect me, but to remove me. Because I didn't fit the version of family they could control. But the truth had a way of rooting itself. Quiet. Relentless. And in the end, It brought me someone who should have never been lost to begin with. I looked at the DNA report one last time before heading upstairs. They lied to keep me out. But the truth brought someone in who should have never been left behind. I didn't lose a family. I found the part that was worth keeping. This story was brutal. But this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.